Hot Water History, episode 165. Just two dudes in gray hoodies talking about stuff on a Wednesday night on the feast day of St. Joseph. Hey,
Right.
Chad, what's going on?
Reveling in this week of the celebration of the feast days of two great, great saints, Patrick and Joseph.
Yeah, I think there's gonna be a lot of comparing and contrasting, mostly contrasting the that we're going to talk a little bit about Ireland and what it's become versus what St. Patrick wanted it to become, but
All of
also,
Europe, too, really.
yeah, I think we should just go right into that. Conor McGregor,
Hmm.
White House, MMA, not there to kick anyone's butt, but kind of gave some people a butt kicking, I would say.
Well, isn't it just nice to have a real alpha male among alpha males who are at least in the White House? They might be pig-headed, they might be wrong on a variety of issues, war and peace, defense, economics, tariffs, you name it. But the beta is gone, to be sure.
Right. It is interesting seeing somebody that if we were living 500 years ago, or probably maybe a little longer than that,
Hmm.
who would actually be in charge, if that makes sense.
Yes.
It wouldn't just be somebody, some 80-year-old behind a desk all the time, that somebody that actually was in the front during wars,
Yeah,
those
that's true.
types of leaders. It's just weird. It was just interesting seeing that. No, that's actually the guy that would have been all of the people's king back in the day.
Sure, the chieftain needs to be respected beyond the fact that he obtained more votes than someone else across a country or among the tribe.
Right. Or yeah, he was more popular than Kamala Harris.
Yes. The retarded contender.
That's who we're that's who our leaders are today. They're
Yes.
not they're not and they're definitely not leading from the
Great
front.
pickings. Yeah,
Yeah.
great pickings we have.
What did you take away from the whole thing though?
Just his explanation about the decline of Ireland, what's transpired there, how the leadership, globalists in general, have so degraded a sense, first of a true patriotism, a virtuous patriotism that the Irish might feel for the uniqueness and beauty of what is traditionally Irish culture and civilization, and how, as someone who I read online put it, Patrick drove out the snakes, that is Saint Patrick, and then the modern Irish people through democracy, in point of fact, or more so acceding to globalism and faux democracy, have allowed the snakes of their globalist leaders to come back in. So, what I think McGregor and others who are concerned about the plight of Ireland and the future of the Irish people, and more generally European civilization as a whole, they anticipate that they need a revolution as transformative as Patrick's, this English slave who came back to evangelize the island and create what we consider to be all that is good and true and beautiful about Irish and by and large European civilization. Because as even a so-so historian like Thomas Cahill pointed out, it was the Irish monks during the time of the Magyar, Viking, and Middle Age, medieval, supposedly Dark Age civilization or invasions of Europe. It was the monks who were copying in their scriptorium and preserving the great works of Western civilization, preserving Western civilization itself to be later used to convert those barbarian hordes of invaders into Europe.
Yeah, it reminded me of the Forgotten Man a little bit that we talked about in the book.
Hmm. How so?
About how he pays, but he's never really taken care of.
Or sure, yeah. He he prays, he pays, But he prays, but he always pays. Hmm.
Yeah, right. And I don't think that's just happening in Ireland.
Unfortunately, it's clearly not just confined to Ireland, as you just jaunt across the Irish Sea and then the English Channel, and you're in the supposedly eldest daughter of the church in France. And just, it was approximately 10 to 12 days ago, we had a heroic and faithful female senator in the French Senate named Valérie Boyer, who got up. She represents a region of France along the Rhone River. She got up into the French Senate and declared that the barbarism and the genocide that's going on in Syria is endangering and threatening ancient Christian peoples. And it is these ancient Christian peoples who live in what in the ancient times was called Mesopotamia, but the in this area between in Iraq and Syria, these Christians speak Aramaic. They speak and say the Our Father in the same tongue as Jesus did
Yeah.
in both their worship and in even indeed when they're not using Arabic or another language like French to engage in daily affairs, they're using Aramaic in their daily lives. And she said, this is endangering these ancient Christian towns and peoples and the very language of Christ. And when she said that, she literally was booed, loudly booed in the French Senate. It is important for people to realize that I would just go so far as to say that we as Americans tend to think of Europe, yes, as the cradle of the church and the nexus and epicenter of Western civilization, which it indeed was, correct? But there is a long, it's not just when the Roman emperors, Diocletian, Decius before him, whoever it might be, were openly persecuting the church and adding more and more names to the martyrology at that time. But the state and European elements within European civilization, often using the conduit and the instrument of the state, have shown themselves time and time again, outside of outstanding examples like Charlemagne or Louis the Ninth or someone like that, St. Louis, have always shown themselves, I shouldn't say always, but have frequently throughout history shown themselves to be not just antagonistic, but murderously so, murderously opposed to the church. And the French Revolution bore that out. And one not need to dive very deep into the archives and to the historical sources to find the barbarism of, for example, the French revolutionaries in regions that were traditional and loyal to the king, but much so more fervently Catholic during the Reign of Terror and even before the Reign of Terror in the process of de-Christianization of France during the Revolution, the barbarism, pillaging, raping, genocide that went on in places like the Vendée and areas of southeastern and western France that were resistant to the revolution. I, in part, it's because of the poor history instruction that Americans receive. But when they think of the French Revolution, they think that all of a sudden, or they suppose that all of a sudden, in just the stroke of a pen or the falling of the guillotine upon the neck of Louis the 16th, that all of France and all Frenchmen turned into raging atheistic revolutionary lunatics. And that wasn't the case. There was internal strife that only, interestingly enough, provided further proof to revolutionaries like Danton, Saint-Just, Marat, Robespierre to engage in more heinous and, well, deplorable acts. And the barbarism was really it's stomach turning um, if you when you read about it. Women, children not spared, um, horrible tortures inflicted upon them. Women, babies ripped out of women's wombs. Just it really knew no end. So there's always been this, at times latent, other times quite obvious antagonism, a murderous opposition to the church and to Christianity and Christian civilization.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Ministre, comment faire confiance à Jolani? Comment éviter la solution finale, l'extermination totale pour ces minorités? Aujourd'hui, les minorités sont en danger de mort et il ne faut pas que nous soyons de nouveau les témoins silencieux de ce massacre annoncé. Permettez-moi de citer l'Évangile selon saint Luc qui dit « S'ils se taisent, les pierres crieront ». Mais il sera trop tard demain pour que la langue du Christ soit encore parlée par les Araméens qui sont en voie d'extermination.
Faut conclure.
Monsieur le ministre, il ne faut
What was your gut reaction to the boos? I'm sure that you're obviously it's
Well, it's not surprising.
It's right. It's
Astonishment was not one of my reactions,
okay.
knowing the history of France as I do, and really the current climate of France. Conversely, however, Charlie, we have to also note that it's amazing that out of the depths of, for example, very violent times like the French Revolution, and then even very atheistic, secular periods or climates like the French political climate of today is toward organized religion, the institutional church, and the like. Interesting, they're very much cozied up to Islam, but the response, God takes these periods and out of the nothingness of that evil and the observable darkness that envelops a people and land, he raises out of that amazing beauty and transformation. So after the French Revolution, you have the Romantic period. Now, the Romantics kind of went astray when they got into naturalism and stuff like that. But you had figures such as Chateaubriand, the writer in France, who was leading a return to the church and a return to Christianity and embracing a mysticism as opposed to the atheistic rationalism of the revolution. So you have that emerge. Furthermore, in France today, I just saw a statistic that within recent memory and vintage, there are more people entering the church this Easter or planning to enter the church in France proper than anyone can remember over the course of the last several decades.
Must be the new altar at Notre Dame.
Well, I suspect that it's not, nor is it the French prime minister and his, or French president and his, perhaps his father, who knows, but certainly a man to whom he's married and who groomed him at the age of 15 when he, Brigitte Macron, we'll just call him that for the moment, seduced and groomed him. So,
Wait,
yeah.
what? I don't know any of that.
No, come on, you haven't been keeping up with Candace Owens months ago exposed with the help of these intrepid French journalists that Brigitte Macron is actually a boy, was a man. And Brigitte Macron's something like 26 years older than Emmanuel Macron.
Mm.
And it was long suspected that Emmanuel Macron, and I think in earlier recordings or interviews had said he was bisexual, or he clearly appears bisexual. But yeah, and this is, everybody's pretty much convinced of this. I mean, it's a running joke that she's a woman. That's not even taken seriously anymore in France and a large part of Europe. And thanks to Candace Owens, people are tapped in here.
Yeah. I forgot to ask at the time. How much Aramaic do you know?
None.
Zero? No
Well,
credit.
other than the phrases of Jesus, like when he says what's the word when he says open up the ears of the girl, Ramatha or something like
Oh,
that.
in the Passion.
Yeah, yes. Or Eli Eli Lama Sabachthani, which is Aramaic.
I was just curious.
How about you?
Zero. I can't remember any of those lines.
I did have the experience of when I was a Dominican, other Dominicans who had been to Iraq, and this is during Iraq War II in the early 2000s or early to mid 2000s, and they had come back and they were really taken aback by when they went to Mass or Vespers or Lauds or something like that, and the Iraqi Dominicans would say the Our Father, they'd say it in Aramaic, and then one of the translators or one of the guides of the Dominicans said, like leaned over and said, you know, these are the words that Jesus used,
Mm,
Our Father. So that was pretty powerful.
that is cool.
Of course, secondhand, but still resonant
Right.
effect.
Right.
What Conor McGregor and Saint Patrick, who had his beautiful breastplate prayer, Christ be beside me, Christ be before me, Christ be behind me, King of my heart. Christ on my left hand, Christ on my right hand, Christ all around me, never depart. So central was the Christianity that Patrick and Augustine and all of the great saints of the early church, and then continued through the holy lives of Christians in the Middle Ages and then into more recent eras of European history. So Christianity was so central. What is apparent to me that let me give you a story about where I'm going. So I used to use in my Western civilization and European history, AP European history courses, a film series that chronicled modern European history. And the narrator and chief contributor was a man named Dr. Robert Buckles. Now, he's still a teacher at Loyola. He was there when I was a student there. And he specializes in British history, but he also does general European survey courses. He does a generally brilliant job of analyzing European history through the economic, political, social lenses, religious history, you name it. He's a good scholar. He's an adept historian. And never have I seen a near masterpiece of a chronicling of European civilization or any history fall so low at the very end. Like the end is so disappointing, it almost ruins the entire
Game of
prior
Thrones.
work. And the reason is at the end of the series, which was in various segments and volumes, he says, what are the prospects for European civilization going forward? And he answers the question by saying, well, in order to understand how European and Western civilization might persevere or continue to live on and perhaps even flourish as time goes on, it's necessary to identify what is the most apparent and evident strength of European civilization. And he's building up, and I'm thinking, oh, he's going to say something along the lines. By the way, he teaches at Loyola University of Chicago, but this is not going to surprise you. His
Oh, I know.
answer has nothing to do with Catholicism nor Christianity, nor anything, for example, like rationalism, concepts of what we determine, or what the Greeks or Romans determined as science, or what they defined as beauty, what they found to be transcendental, or more so, even something along the lines of notions and philosophies of consent, which seem to be, along with science, uniquely European, at least in their understanding and expression of it. No, he said, and I quote you, I shit you not, Charlie. This is how he ends it. He says, the greatest strength of European civilization is self-reflection. That no, like no other civilization, perhaps in human history, Europeans are uniquely self-reflective and they're willing to condemn themselves and the elements of their past which need to be condemned. And he goes into, of course, the classic imperialism, intolerance, religious fanaticism. And this is what he identified as the greatest strength of Western civilization. No, no, no. Of course it can't be that. What kind of we're talking about betas before. What kind of a beta civilization would ever allow an individual within it to say the greatest strength that you have? Let's say we were talking about those chieftains. Conor McGregor's greatest strength is his ability to reflect upon the mistakes he made in the fight. No, it's that it rages against evil, that it promotes human dignity, that it espouses reason to the extent and recognizes the power of the human intellect so long as it is guided and inspired by our divine creator who made this earthly existence a pilgrimage unto something much greater in eternity with him. Unless you have that outlook, it was that outlook and what we might rightly call Western civilization, a recognition that God had bestowed upon human beings immense potentiality in intellect and immense power. And that what we were to do with that was to exercise charity in the face of hate. Hope, which Europe is without. So long as they don't have Christ, the incarnate Word of God, at the center of their existence, and have replaced him with self-reflection and self-castigation, well then, what is there to hope for? All you are is an accused criminal, and you have no means by which to recuse yourself or exonerate yourself, or more so, be absolved of those sins. Isn't it true that whenever we hear stories of the globalists talking, whether it's Mark Rutte as the head of NATO or this Ursula von der Leyen, who's the apparatchik demoniac, or Christine Lagarde, or any of these figures, Keir Starmer in the UK, they embrace a type of nihilistic despair to the point where they don't have any. If you can't absolve yourself and you're constantly obsessed with the sins of prior generations, correct? And you falsely, by the way, it's very Calvinistic. In modern Europe is a Calvinist psychotic shithole. And what I mean by that is, you might remember in the very early stages of our course on U.S. history, I read a tract from when we were talking about early colonial religion and practice, particularly Congregationalism. We were talking about the first Great Awakening in the colonies, but it had transpired in the British Isles and then got imported into the American colonies. I read a tract from Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God.
Mm.
And it's all the hellfire and brimstone. Humanity is like a spider, and God's holding the web, and it's a very tenuous web. And at any moment, he's going to cut it out of just sheer justice and spite, and we're going to plunge into eternal fire and all of these things of a vindictive and indifferent God.
Right.
And it's a lot of, it has a greater eloquence to it, but essentially the message is that of the preacher on the street corner in any major city today. y'all going to hell. And here's why. So I asked you guys as students, I asked all my students in my classes, what's the attractant here? Why were people coming to listen far and wide to George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards and Cotton Mather? All these guys with the same essential message of you're all condemned, you're all disgusting. They took on the Lutheran anthropology, at least description of it. Luther described the human person as a pile of shit. That God's grace fell over like a thin coat of snow, so that when God looked upon us as humanity, he wasn't utterly disgusted. At least he saw the snow. See?
Yeah.
And that's where Europe it's stuck. But what's the attractant? Whether it's Keir Starmer or it's Jonathan Edwards or it's Cotton Mather or any of these figures, they're not really talking about one themselves. No, no. When they say y'all going to hell, they're not including themselves, you see?
Right.
Nor are they including their disciples. So when Ursula von der Leyen, when she goes in front of the European Parliament, and aside from the heroic, one Greek lady who got up and started yelling about globalists, and the wonderful Irish European commissioner who talks about the genocide going on in Palestine and all of the horrible things, or you get the Polish representative who gets up and says we have to honor Mary, Jesus, and Joseph. These people they're hissed at in the European Union in Brussels, correct? Those people are the ones who are going to hell. They're the religious fanatics. They're the deceived. Yeah, from the perspective of the modern European secularist, and the real ones who are saved are the ones who buy into all of their remedies. They're what I call their messianic megalomania. When you remove the actual Messiah, you have to fill that void with a series of programs that you think are going to remedy the path of human existence. And that's, of course, climate change solutions, Green New Deal, socialism, communism, population control, euthanasia, abortion. The eugenic core of all of that is something that they have their god, they have their worship piece. It's Moloch and Baal and Mars. And any civilization that replaces Jesus Christ, the incarnate word, the second person of the Trinity, the angel of the Lord from the Old Testament, with all of that, with those demons, and you see why Europe is crumbling. There's nothing more beta than disespousing the faith that saves a continent and a world.
I like that. Do you want to talk about another demon?
Now, let's do that. The third and final for now, until Bob Moran creates another cartoon of his
Yeah,
demonology
these
series,
have
his
been
modern
great.
demonology series. We have Portis. For those of you who are listening and didn't catch the previous two episodes, actually previous three episodes, in the previous three episodes, we skipped 1 week because we had a lot to talk about and we wanted to afford proper time to the demonology series by the great Bob Moran. The previous two characters and demons were based on Joe Biden and one Donald Trump. We had Sniff as Joe Biden and Megadon as Donald Trump. And here, well, Bob tells us about none other than Portis. Why don't you share with especially the just audio public and audience,
Sure.
what's going on here?
Portus, a revered duke in hell commanding several legions, Portus inhabits the earthly realm as a squeaky-voiced nerd, masquerading as a software designer, philanthropist, health expert, and farmer. Though rarely seen, the demon's true form is that of a multi-limbed, avaricious hermaphrodite straddling a giant mosquito with a deadly proboscis. It is believed that humanity inadvertently granted Portus permission to enter their homes and torment their souls when they began to open windows in the early 1990s.
Wow. None other than Bill Gates as Portus. And of course, Bill Gates featured with the typical demon horns and wings, the darkened wings. He has large female breasts because, well, he's an hermaphrodite. And if anyone's actually seen Bill Gates walk around, he has breasts that would, protrude protrude out from his sweater vests or sweaters. He's carrying two bags of money with dollar signs. He's riding a very large mosquito. By the way, he has many appendages, very reminiscent of Hindu gods or goddesses. Uh, his legs seem to be jutting out from different areas of his body. And then he's riding a giant mosquito with, of course, the proboscis is a needle, the extending into the air, ready to inject people who have opened the window, whether it was windows in the early 1990s or more so early, opened up the window and essentially granted limited, maybe somewhat uninformed consent to his programs of depopulation, which are manifest, manifold, and unfortunately numerous, as anyone from India, Africa will tell you, and anyone aware of his activities in the Western and First World.
I love the stinger.
Yeah, the stinger
It was such
as a
a
needle
good touch.
certainly is. What do you think about the references? The avaricious hermaphrodite and the I love how the squeaky voiced nerd masquerading as a software designer, philanthropist, health expert, and farmer. The just masquerading. There's also I've seen things where he's even masquerading as the founder of Windows, that he's being propped up by a lot of really sinister people behind the scenes, that he was not the progenitor, if you will.
Mm, yeah. I like the farmer. Adding that was funny.
Yes, right. And that's a reference clearly to all the farmland he's buying up through various auspices and financial mechanisms.
Right. And then
Do you think he's a worthy inclusion in the modern demonology series?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
right. And in Bob's other cartoons that you can visit at bobberan.uk or bobberan.co.uk, what we're looking at is the work of I think Bob Moran's a combination of Dante and Michelangelo for our times.
Wow.
Because Dante had a sharp tongue for all of his political, social, religious, even family opponents, people who were really, really evil and sinister. And of course, Dante didn't have or didn't paint and use images. He used his pen. It was Michelangelo who used the brush and, of course, his hands to sculpt. But that's what Moran's combining here. These polemics and visual diatribes and condemnations are just so overwhelmingly powerful and convincing, and they hit you right away, just as if you were to read one of the condemnations of Dante against one of the evil bishops or religious of his period in time, or period in area. There's Portis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's disgusting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how do we transition from Portis and Bill Gates to something we feel compelled to speak upon a little bit or address, and that is the release of the JFK files? What's your take here, Charlie?
I think there's a reason we're keeping it towards the back.
Mm.
I think underwhelming is maybe the proper word.
Sure. There's some interesting points in it. Like, I mean, this guy, James Angleton, did you see the one file that was revealed that what is, I suppose, unsatisfying or yeah, it's just not, yeah, it's unsatisfying about the release of the files is that all of this we kind of already knew.
That point right there is something I want to hold on to for a little bit here.
Okay.
That is a little bit of the unsatisfying part,
Mm.
is that it's like the equivalent to the science changed,
Yes.
but this we knew the science the whole time.
Mm.
It's permission for blue-pilled people to change their mind on something.
Okay.
That's what I
Yes.
don't like. Now, the reports came out, and now that there's new evidence that's
Yes.
out that it might have been there might have been some foul play here. That's the stuff I can't
And there's
stand.
never forthcoming will be an apology to all the people, whether it be Roger Stone or Oliver Stone. I mean, we're gonna stick with the Stones or anyone who was active. Lou Rockwell, by the way, was a major contributor to writing works about how the Warren Commission was a joke and that uh, the Church Commission was not acted upon for a reason, that the CIA was delving into all of this horrific activity from psychological mind control to working with the worst people on earth to whether it's MK Ultra or Operation Northwoods, all these things. I mean, so the idea that the CIA was right behind the assassination and that Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone and that Jack Rubenstein just happened to lose his mind after shooting Lee Harvey Oswald and the president's supposed assassin. Especially notice the immediacy after Lee Harvey Oswald declares himself a patsy that he didn't do it, and then right, it's all of a sudden Jack Rubenstein, who was used as a hitman before uh, by the CIA and was in its employ. I mean, come on. But I did find a couple of the files that have been released that I set eyes on to be a little bit interesting, and let me share those with you. The first was that this shady character James Angleton, by the way, his nickname was Jesus, James Jesus Angleton. He was known to be a kind of dual agent of the CIA and Mossad, to the extent that Angleton was running interference for for Israel against the Kennedy administration and working with internal uh, officials within the Kennedy administration to stop JFK from doing two things. One was forcing Israel and various Israeli diplomats to register as foreign agents. That's why even today, APAC doesn't have the status of a foreign agent. It's able to operate unlike any other entity from a country that's clearly allied with that country's government. So that JFK was adamant about that. And then we know too that JFK had immense difficulty with David Ben-Gurion, who was the then Israeli prime minister. He was really the founder of Israel when David Ben-Gurion was testing all these nuclear weapons in and around Israel, and Kennedy's negotiating with everyone in the world, including the Soviets, to get a nuclear arms treaty and nuclear testing ban. He even got French President Charles de Gaulle at the time to agree to a nuclear ban, okay, which was really difficult to do. And he's just screaming at Ben-Gurion, you can't do this. I'm not going to allow you to have these nuclear weapons, and you're doing all these tests. Stop doing the tests. Well, it did lead to Ben-Gurion's ousting from the Israeli presidency or premiership. I can't remember what it was called, or it was prime minister or whatever. I don't know what position he had, but he did step down. But the process by which Kennedy was the process to allow Israel to get nuclear weapons was alive and well within the administration. And what should happen is Angleton was working with Avery Dulles and others. I mean, Avery Dulles, the former director of the CIA, who had been dismissed by Kennedy a month earlier, from my recollection. Yeah. Well, at one point, Avery Dulles said in open public, I wish someone would get rid of the little man.
Yeah, I remember this.
Right? So this is not. And then, of course, the whole thing where it's proven now that they were active about spreading the whole idea of conspiracy theory so as to mitigate and diminish any, well, thought of a contrary narrative of what transpired with the assassination. So, and then, oh, by the way, this James Jesus Angleton, guess what foreign nation granted him a full honorary funeral and state, what did they call it? Like state honor. It has a Star of David on its flag.
No way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know that part.
Oh, yeah. The guy's like a hero in Israel. Mm-hmm. So there we go. Yeah. So in many ways, it's kind of
It's like the party. It's like the party's over a little bit.
Yeah. So, or you go into an ice cream shop and you're like, should I try something daring? Because I haven't had that yet. I've heard it's good. It's something, it could be a total revelation. No, I'm just going to stick with French vanilla because I know what's under there. I'm just going to take the French vanilla. And you're always satisfied by the French vanilla, but you know really what you were going to get.
It kind of feels like Blackout Wednesday when you're at a bar with too many underage people.
Yes, right. And
where you could tell there's some people having a blast and you've kind of been here before.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I felt about the JFK files.
Correct. Or yeah, and because they're so drunk, they don't get to fully appreciate the good stuff that's going on around them, like what we should be focused on or what you should take from it. Anyway.
Yeah. Dumb analogies. Anyways.
Okay. Last thing that we're going to touch upon today is, has an Israeli connection. So why don't we go ahead and play the little clip from this?
Yeah. Okay.
This RN, this resident nurse, and she has something, albeit anecdotal, that's quite revelatory about who gets to jump the line when it comes to organ donation in the United States. So let's play that clip.
During my time spent travel nursing, I worked at a hospital and I was floated onto a floor that I didn't normally go to. And they specialized in organ transplants. And within 5 minutes of me being on the floor that day and getting a report, I heard someone make a comment about, oh, haha, it's okay, half the floor is Israeli anyway. And I didn't really know what that meant. So I asked the girl that was about to give me a report and she was like, oh, yeah, like half our floor at any given moment are Israeli citizens that have come here for healthcare, which I didn't really think much of. I was like, oh, okay, they're flying in. Okay. It wasn't until I sat down with one of my Israeli patients and she talked me through the whole thing, that I realized what was going on. Israeli citizens are given the option. If there's a U.S. hospital that has a procedure that is not offered in Israel, or if there's a U.S. hospital that is better at a procedure than a hospital in Israel, or if the Israeli organ donation centers don't have a good match for them, they come to the U.S. and receive our organs from our citizens. I don't know how it's happening, but I have a very high suspicion that some of these Israeli citizens are being fast-tracked on the wait list for U.S. organs. In specific, because one of the patients I was taking care of had received a double heart and lung transplant, and they had only been in the country for less than a week. How do you get matched and then become a recipient of such a important set of organs after waiting only a week? More than that, for any Israeli citizen that is brought here, their flight to the U.S. is covered. Their stay while in the United States, their stay in the hospital, which, mind you, for the average person receiving a organ transplant or a high-level procedure where they will need to be hospitalized for up to 2 weeks afterwards, that's like...
It is anecdotal.
Yes, but totally believable. Like, is there anything that in that girl's tone, young woman's tone, in her presentation, nor in what we can understand about the operation of the American medical system, that would lead you to conclude that, oh, she's just totally off base. She's not, that can't be happening. As after COVID, after the AIDS epidemic, after, of all people, Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins are the leaders of the NIH and all these different entities, that a country and its interests that so dominate American foreign policy, so dominate American domestic policy, would not also have resonance and connection to determining American medical policy? Especially when you have such, whether it's neocons or your Zionist Jew or your Zionist Christian in the United States, who are internal and domestic, not just apologists for everything Israel does and is, but fall over themselves to almost worship the whole Zionist experiment.
Yeah.
So when people with suitcases full of cash or shekels come in and they need a double lung and heart coronary transplant, well, guess what? Jimmy from, Main Street, Wichita, Kansas, you're out of line and out of luck. Shlomo's getting it.
Do you want to talk about a town where other medical foul play has happened in the not so recent past?
Not so distant past.
Not so distant past.
You mixed up your
Distant
phraseology.
recent.
Let's talk about it then.
All right, everyone.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Should we go to your gay suburb now?
It's the People segment. Meanwhile in Oak Park, brought to you by Tridentine Brewing.
And my palate has been wet and my voice is thankfully lubricated. My vocal cords are lubricated because of the brilliant Quartermaster Jerry, which you could get pretty much anywhere in Wisconsin now, right? Anywhere in Wisconsin and soon to be throughout the Midwestern world.
First one, Trump cuts briefly force Oak Park staffer out of job, future, quote, uncertain. A federally funded Oak Park public health staffer was one of the 200,000 workers told they were let go amid a DOJ probe last month until the decision was reversed. The Oak Park Public Health Department thought that it had lost federal funding sponsoring a staff member's place in the village, but the decision has been reversed for now. Since October 2024, the department had benefited from the work of Maya Feiladou, a staffer participating in a prestigious Center for Disease Control fellowship program.
Oh, great. The CDC working in Oak Park.
Last month, Feiladou, I think that's how you say it, Feiladou.
Yeah.
received notice that she'd been terminated from the CDC as President Donald Trump's administration pushed federal agencies to get rid of staff who'd been employed for less than a year. My gosh, these people do not have easy names. Fuiladu returned to work at Village Hall last Thursday after receiving notice from the CDC that she'd been reinstated. Quote,
Guess who's back? Back again.
last
Feel it do.
Last month, the associate received a termination notice from the CDC. However, the associate was informed again by the CDC that they had been reinstated in March. Dan Yapchik, he's the public communications director, said in a prepared statement, "For now, the public health associates program seems to be up and running, but its continuation is still uncertain." Its continuation.
Oh, it's as a conjunction. Yeah.
Roughly
Or
1,300
contraction, sorry.
probationary employees at the CDC were fired last month, along with over 5,000 across the entire Department of Health and Human Services, according to Associated Press.
Not enough.
Fuiladu, a recent Northwestern University graduate, is one of roughly 100 young public health professionals taking part in the CDC's fellowship program. The program funds placements for recent public health graduates to gain field experience with local health departments around the country while working on special projects. Fuiladu's work in Oak Park has included helping to develop a new program, improving access to care, and working on the village's opioid overdose prevention program, among other projects.
It's always so aspirational. They're working to get started, to help found a new program that might come to operational capacity sometime in the future. It's always anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. Eventually the startup funding runs out. You can only pretend that
And
you
then,
have
of
something
course,
for so long.
they come rent seeking again for continuation funding and super startup funding.
Right. The CDC's Laboratory Leadership Service, another agency fellowship program that prepares PhD level scientists to lead lab safety efforts, was also targeted in last month's round of funding cuts. While most of the fellows in both programs had been reinstated, CDC leaders were ordered to deliver plans for slashing the agency's workforce through more layoffs by Thursday, March 13th, according to the New York Times.
Get that resume ready for Starbucks, people.
Former CDC Director Tom Frieden wrote an editorial for Stat on the heels of the cuts last month, calling both fellowship programs essential to public health and safety in the United States.
Because what would we do without someone helping to facilitate, to get ready a new program that might come to fruition?
Quote, CDC reform requires strengthening programs like these, not eliminating them, Frieden wrote. Public health reform should focus on building a stronger workforce, not dismantling the few programs that strengthen it.
It's always all their arguments just are vapid assertions, right? So this is not proof. This is not an argument in any rational way for the worth or value that might be created as a result of this labor or work, an effort. It's always these kind of, vacuous and specious canards that just say, well, the public health reform should focus on building a stronger workforce, not tearing it down.
Yeah.
But there's no examination of whether the workforce is actually doing anything or contributing anything of quality.
FAP and LLS fill critical gaps in public health infrastructure, and no alternative programs exist to replace them. Cutting them is a short-term budget move that will have long-term and costly health and economic consequences for national security and public safety. If the goal is a healthier American and a better CDC, eliminating FAP and LLS is the wrong way to get there.
Because the NIH and CDC and FAP and LLS have been so instrumental in creating a healthy American over the past 5 decades, yeah? So we just need to, of course, given their record of overwhelming and prodigious success, fund them and support them more.
The Trump administration's efforts to cut federal jobs have been tangled up in federal court as Democratic states attorney general offices challenge the layoffs. An order laid down Thursday told the administration that it must offer to rehire more than 10,000 fired probationary workers across several agencies. The White House has appealed that ruling.
Right. Yeah, these are just stall tactics because that's all going to go through and those cuts are going to be made.
Here's the next one. No village hall cost estimates before the election.
Oh, Vicky Skaman's happy about that.
Discussion
You can go
pulled
on
from
saying,
the
"Oh, I don't
agenda.
know."
Yeah, Ravi was getting a couple too many votes off of that one.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, new estimates ran into the 200 million, so well, we're not going to release that
It's
number.
not so important to have the conversation if it's
All of a sudden the conversation's over, or at least
we're gonna table
conversation's delayed.
table the conversation.
We have to have the conversation after the election.
Oak Park's Village Board won't get the chance to weigh in on one of Oak Park's hottest topics until after the municipal election. The Village Board will not
It's a
review
hot
an
topic for a village that is just like a gigantic hot topic store in your mall.
right. It's Black Friday every week, and
Everybody's goth.
the village board will not review an updated plan for the construction project that will move the Oak Park Police Department into a new building and make updates to Village Hall until a special session sometime next month. The discussion had long been scheduled for Tuesday, March 18th board meeting, the body's final meeting before voters head to the polls. With the village president's seat and several trustee seats up for grabs in April 1st local election, the special meeting will be a lame duck session for at least one member of the current board. Village President Vicky Skaman said the scheduling change is, quote, disappointing but necessary. Village
And
staff
tremendously convenient for me.
Village staff wanted more time to review the architectural consultant's report so that they could fully understand the impact that the proposal would have on property taxes before bringing the proposal before the board, Skaman said.
Guess what? They're going up.
Quote, I'm proud of the fact that we're a board that does its due diligence and that nothing that's not fully thought out would be acceptable to us, she said. I think it's important that the 7 people that are sitting at the board table right now still be the ones to get to vote on the project that they have been working on for the last year.
What? Wait, so she wants a vote without the final figures? Is that right? Is that what I'm to understand?
No,
Yeah, because she wants to hold off in releasing the final numbers, right, until after the election. Well, if she says the 7 people that are sitting at the board table right now, those are her and the 7 trustees, yeah? Well, they're not going to be
I get it.
they're not going to be the same ones after the election, one would suspect.
Well, there must be some, it must be like the inauguration gap.
Oh, maybe. Maybe.
That's probably it.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
The date for the special session has not yet been set. The village hall debate has become a central issue for the village president election as Skaman and her opponent, Trustee Ravi Parakat. I wonder if we could get him to campaign on hot water history. Like,
Not a
is it
chance.
worth an email?
All,
Hey, Ravi. Hey,
all that would
Ravi.
ensure is that Skaman is president.
Yeah. Ravi Parakat have presented dramatically different pictures of what the construction project would cost the village. Skaman holds that it's been her priority and the will of the entire board that the total cost of the project be kept as close to $100 million as possible, while Parakat contends that the project would balloon to at least 140 million if continued under Skaman's leadership. The discussion of the project has dominated several candidate forums between the two. Parakat said that he'd expected Tuesday's meeting to be well attended by prospective voters. Quote, this issue is incredibly significant to every single person living in Oak Park, Parakat said. It has the potential to price people out.
No kidding. That's what
Yeah.
Oak Park does best, pricing people out.
Yeah, sure does.
Yep.
Okay, that is the segment.
Oh, wow. Boom.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
What would have happened if I'd gone for it and just said, no, I'm gay?
Short but very sweet.
Yeah. It was a uneventful week, interestingly enough.
Hmm.
I did like I thought I did think the Trump story would have a little more juice with the firing stuff, but uh,
Well, we are coming to a point where there's going to be a necessary decision that has to be. Okay, so this is actually kind of a fascinating constitutional and historical moment because is Trump going to just simply do what he ought to do and say that these district judges that are thwarting all of his executive orders from deportation to ending transgenderism in schools or something like that, will he just ignore them? Yes, because indeed they don't have any grounding. And it's so funny because remember what we were told about how all of the election challenges from the Trump uh, election campaign in 2020 and 2021, those cases were all dismissed because the judges found there was no evidence of voter fraud or anything like that. They weren't dismissed outright. It's that it's true. The critics at the time, they never saw any of the evidence because all the cases were thrown out because they didn't have proper standing, right? Well, here, these district courts are asserting that they have standing over national executive policy, or more so, natural executive action, right? So where does their jurisdiction come from? Now, one could argue that it comes from the fact that suits have been filed in their district courts. But why is it that they have, why would a district judge, let's say in the Ninth Circuit in Seattle, right? Or, that ostensibly represents Seattle or the environs thereof, or Portland, have a means by which to frustrate national policy? And you know me, I'm a secessionist. So, but in advocating for the breakup of the Union, correct, and for localism and local government and state and local sovereignty and self-determination, that does not mean that I'm advocating for localities to have power over national issues.
right.
There's not a connection there.
So did you think in 2020 when they were throwing out cases, did you think that was the right move?
Oh no, they shouldn't. They should have heard those cases. Uh, they should have heard those
So
cases, but only
what was
only the
their case for
jurisdiction,
throwing it out?
not
What
to
was their case
determine.
for throwing it out?
Not to determine whether the election should be overthrown or redone. But remember, the cases that were put before the district judges, federal district judges regarding the election were about local
Right.
election problems.
Yeah.
So they would file.
But they would say, well, we can't overthrow a national.
No, no, no. They would argue that one of the main arguments was that according to kind of legal precedent, which I don't fully understand, nor do I want to, in order to have filed suit on the basis of trying to enact a recount or do any things that would be the means by which to remedy the situation. Yeah. The courts would argue that you should have filed before the election because you're not showing that injury has properly taken place. And I don't know exactly the reasoning as to why that makes legal sense. Maybe there isn't any legal sense. But you can't, in other words, you can't argue after the fact that you've been, I forget how it went, but you can't argue after the fact that because the outcome didn't come your way, that's the grounds by which you're charging that there's injury. You see?
Yeah.
I guess that was the rationale, which seems ridiculous to me. I mean, no one files suit before you get shot,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
You do so afterwards, after a battery has taken place or an attack.
Cool.
Good. All right. Well, pray for Europe. We ask the maybe intercession of the patrons of Europe, particularly Saint Benedict, Patrick, Joseph, our Holy Mother Mary, that things get remedied there and throughout the world, because we're not in great shakes here either. In a great situation here either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, everyone.
Everybody, remember to be optimistic though.
I was going to say,
war.
we can't, I didn't want to leave on a bad
Be a
note.
joyful war, because like I said before, out of signs of despair and darkness, that's when the light shines brightest, and that's why we have conversions, mass conversions in France, throughout the world, and hopefully that staves off and creates a more, well, certainly alpha, but stronger and faithful church.
Amen.
Amen. All the best. Peace.
God bless.